me here today are Tom Simpson with MediaQuark, and Eric Picard with Mediamath, and Chris O'Hara with Krux, but he's agreed to change the name to MediaQuark for the panel, just for consistency's sake. There's been there's always some misinformation about programmatic. So I'd like to just give a little preamble here. Programmatic is different from RTB, but readily misunderstood because programmatic really started with RTB. It started with unsold inventory that used to be made available through networks when they bought unsold inventory and then arbitraged it. The exchanges came along and made it possible for us to automate things. And programmatic came along to take advantage of that automation. So it was all leftover inventory at the start. But we've made a lot of progress since then, and we've got forward or future inventory. We've got private exchanges. We've got a lot of flavors of programmatic that automate the process and take away the inefficiency of buying the same inventory quarter after quarter when the parameters are set, the pricing is set, the targets are set, and the agreements are already in place between buyer and seller. Why do we have to go through an RFP process? That's the best example I can give for a lot of the programmatic that's not RTB. And that is the really rapid growing area. I know it's more forward in some markets versus others, but the others are going to, I think, come along very quickly. The overriding topic we're really talking about today within leveraging big data to take programmatic to the next level. What's the next level? When we do RFPs, they might be 10 or 12 pages long. There might be a number of parameters that we take into account. Different target audiences, whether they be demographic or behavioral or sociographic or psychographic or a number of other areas. It might be contextual. It might have to do with viewability and other factors relative to tracking. But when we buy programmatic, there's often only a few parameters that are put out there. And it's our assumption that the next step in working assumption, the next step in programmatic is going to let's take advantage of this automation and let's make it more complex. Let's try to satisfy really all of the needs that a client and a media agency have relative to programmatic. And so this group is very educated relative to that, and they're all involved in the next steps with programmatic. And so what I'd like to do is ask each of them to give me a few minutes on, we have an abundance of data to make media buying decisions today. Which data points should we really be applying, and what are the priorities relative to that? So I'm going to start in the middle with Eric, because I told him I was going to start with him, and then have the other two comment also on how do we take programmatic to the next level? I mean, that's really what your job is, right?
Sure. Hello. I thought I would start by having everybody stand up. No, I'm not going to do that.
Shut your eyes.
Shut your eyes. Touch the tip of your nose. I also thought if the sofas were out here, I was going to kind of lay horizontally on them while I talked because they look so awkward. I thought I'd get comfortable. But all joking aside, my job since joining Mediamath when they acquired my startup Rare Crowds a few months ago has been really to try to follow through on the programmatic promise of doing everything over the programmatic channel. So we've been investigating lots of places to invest engineering resources and data science resources. And some of the things that have occurred to us are really that we have access to an immense amount of data. We talk about that a lot at this conference, about big data and all the things that we have. But But really, when I think about big data, I of course kind of think about reporting and analyzing information so that it can be presented visually. All of those things are of critical importance. But what I really, really think about is how do we turn that into action in real time in a fully automated way. So the idea that when we see an impression on the internet, we have associated to that impression all the data that we've already spent all the hard work to synchronize with various data providers, various DMPs, all connected into our platform. But it's really about lighting up that impression so that it can be activated. So when I think about that, and I think about the other parts of budgets that we typically don't see as a DSP, because part of our business is as a DSP, it's all of the other parts of the budget. So it's the direct buys that are happening through RFPs. It's the translation of the goals of a campaign, which are multivariate and in many ways can be answered through a whole slew of mechanisms. How do we light those mechanisms up? So what I've been working on for the last few months is really digging into how we can activate the data that we have access to for pretty much every impression that happens across every exchange, across every marketplace that we've plugged into, and take that data and activate it for learning. Now, the simple way to say this, if I wanted to be really succinct, would be to say, we're building a mini planning tool, but that's not what we're doing. We're actually taking data from the RTB world, which is overwhelmingly where we touch, and we're turning that into insights about where inventory could be discovered that you might want to use to fulfill your campaign. The export of that will be light up some RTB campaigns, light up some direct campaigns, push out to external systems, such as external planning systems for direct buys with these learnings intact, all sorts of things that I don't think I'm really seeing a lot of people make use of the data derived from the RTB space. So that's the kind of thing that I think that really takes programmatic forward, because it's not just about, as Dave said, buying in the RTB space. It's overwhelmingly about automation, but also maybe about how we apply some of the learnings from these very automated real-time systems against all media buying.
I'm going to ask for some more specific examples when we come back around, but Tom, do you want to
Yeah, I mean,
give your opening or just build on that, either way?
Well, I mean, I'll add to Eric's point. I think it's very interesting talking about real time and how much of what we actually do in programmatic is real time, how necessary it is to operate in real time at a basic level. If we're talking about driving programmatic forward, we need to build better infrastructure for moving data around. At the moment, it's difficult to push data from one point to another and deliver against some of these some of our aspirations. I think that is particularly relevant when we're talking about creative. One of the things that I'm focused on doing in the future is building what I would call the conversation machine, which is where you can actually take a conversation with a consumer from the prospecting stage right the way through to conversion, ensure that every message that you're delivering is relevant to the stage in the conversation that you're at. It's very similar to the sort of sales process that you would have with a salesman if you were buying a car, that kind of thing. I think that requires better infrastructure. It requires real-timeness. I think that's a big area of focus if we want to drive programmatic.
Chris?
Yeah, so I mean, I think from our perspective, or at least from my perspective, is you have, as a marketer, and we work with a lot of marketers and publishers at Krux, but I think what everyone's trying to get to is really the truth of identity. And we know as marketers, whoever's out here that's a marketer expressing a lot of dollars into the ecosystem, and you have a lot of great data that comes back every time you spend a dollar, whether it's a click or a view or a follow or a hover or a facial expression, and some of the newer technologies. So all that data kind of comes back to you, and it lives in these separate silos. So obviously the first challenge you have as a marketer, even a publisher, is trying to understand their audience, is to reconcile all that individual data. You know, Eric has 8 different cookies and an IDFA and a tablet IDFA, and he has a, you know, probably a device ID on a Roku, and all those things sit separately. So a marketer sees him as 9 different people. So the challenge is, first, let me reconcile all those individual device identities up to some sort of universal identity. And then the second step is you have to establish what is the truth of that identity. How do you derive that? So there's 3 different types of data, right? So there's first-party data, which from 3 days of talking, we've all kind of agreed is the most truthful kind of data. It's derived from stuff that is deterministic. People have downloaded a coupon, they've registered, they've declared themselves in some way, and they're in your CRM system, and you're like, I really know Eric, what he likes to do, what he's interested in. He likes a red car versus a green car, what have you. So it's easier to market to him and tell a story to him and deliver the right message, right place, right time to him if you have the technology. The other way is third-party data. Everybody has access to the same amount of third-party data. It has huge amounts of scale, but what's the value of it? Did I go on a website, I saw a picture of a car, and now I'm an auto intender? How is that data derived? How is it collected? How can you use it? So not only is it overly commoditized, but it doesn't give you any kind of business advantage versus your competitors, because Kellogg's has it, and so does P&G, and Unilever has it also, right? So the idea is there's how do you create a people layer of intelligence that sits across all the different channels you market in that's reliable? And one way is to go to Facebook and give them all your data and let them worry about it, because they have 1.3 billion identities, or probably more. And so they have that people layer. So great, just use Atlas, and Facebook will figure out the people part for you and reconcile identity, or Google. Or, and I think Aaron from Kellogg said this before, why don't Kellogg's and Unilever and P&G just take all their their CRM data, send it through LiveRamp or whoever else, get the identity behind it, and then they have this huge consortium of identity, right? Or publishers could do the same thing. So at the end of the day, it's about unsiloing all the data you have, and the second thing is about, once you have that data, understanding the truth of it, so that when you express it back out into the ecosystem, whether it's an email or site experience or video or mobile or display, you reached a person, not a device. And I think before we can get to the next phase of programmatic, that has to happen, and very few people are doing that right now well. And until they do it well, we can't truly measure things, and we can't truly target very well.
You really think you're going to get publishers to work together on data?
The answer is sort of a give-to-get mechanism. So if the Times feels super valuable that they understand their user identity, maybe they'll go to the Journal, and on an anonymized basis, they could share a universal ID with one another and create a consortium of types that would enable cross-device user identity.
I can see it on second tier. I just have a hard time imagining how the ones with portal-like numbers would be, because they think they're going to be the net winner. The Googles, Facebooks are going to do that kind of thing.
I will say that we are, as a platform, seeing that happen in France with Laplace Media, and a lot of publishers come together to form consortiums for the very purpose of battling against Google and Facebook. Now, whether or not they're sharing discrete individual identity with each other is another story.
That's encouraging.
I think whether it's publishers building the identity map, or whether it's a kind of an ecosystem initiative, it's incredibly important. I did want to pick up on one point that you made about third-party data, and I think it's a point that is made far too often, in that there is no value in buying third-party data because everybody else is buying the same data as you. Actually, a complete fallacy. If you're targeting the right people, and if your third-party data is accurate, you want the same data as everybody else, because if somebody's going to buy a car, then as a car advertiser, you want to put an ad in front of them. So you want the same data as everybody else. So the problem is bad third-party data, not the fact that third-party data is commoditized.
Well, yeah, there's an old rule in direct mail saying your list is only as good as it was last effectively used.
I think on that point, the idea that third-party data is overused would be disabused by any of the data providers that are in the room. I don't think that that's a problem that has to be resolved. But I do think that more creative ways of using data, including third-party data, are right on the cusp. And I agree with the sentiment of getting IDs correlated and normalized and truthful is critical. But it's underway, right? I mean, I haven't talked to one person at a single big company in the tech space, in the ad tech space, that isn't working on this problem. So it's not like it's a surprise. I think there's other things maybe we can think about. I liked your idea, actually.
Well, I will say about third-party data, I do agree with you. I think third-party data is important because it's a subset of really important scale data that can be used to enrich hypotheses you've made using smaller seed segments of your own first-party data. And it's highly valuable when it comes to lookalike modeling just from a scale perspective. What I will say about, and to enrich Eric's point, is that we're all doing lookalike modeling, and when it comes to lookalike modeling, Krux and Loademy and Mediamind and Math, and everyone probably uses very similar algorithms for probabilistic modeling. Eric might disagree with me, but they're all basically, hey, I've seen this guy. He's logged into this Wi-Fi tower 3 times at 5:45 in the morning, viewed this type of content. When he goes home, he does this. Probably 90% probability it's the same guy. But when you really try to validate the truth of that, when you bounce that off 100 million users, the result you get is a lot different than when you try to bounce it off 2.5 billion users seen on a monthly basis. So scale is the determining factor when the algorithm's sort of the same. Right.
There was talk this morning about trying to combine various kinds of targeting, and I'd like to pursue that a little bit. There are buys that are made that are demographic buys. There are buys that are made that are behavioral buys. There are companies who feature lookalike targeting. There are companies that feature birds of a feather targeting. There's a lot of different ways to target. You're going to really only be able to identify somebody specifically if you can combine a bunch of these methods. Is there a way to do that and still scale?
Yes.
And how are you going to do that, Eric?
Well, I think it's alchemy, right?
It's alchemy.
Okay, we're just gonna use alchemy for the rest of the day now.
Whenever we don't want to answer a question, it's alchemy.
Yeah, thanks, Miko.
Well, I mean, I think there's some subtleties and nuances when it comes to all kinds of targeting. What I think we're seeing more and more of now with all this data science is the ability to take a real user identity and hash it and turn it into an online identity, so to push real identity into the online identity space. But what we're all kind of dependent on, whether you're using a Newstar or LiveRamp or a Datalogix, is the fact that when they're hashing against the 9 or 12 known PII things that make up personal identity, whether it's address or email or what have you, that all happens in a black box. So they're saying, oh, well, I'm more dependent on email, or for this area of the country, address is more important. And I think it's a real disservice. So, you push your really valuable CRM data in there and you pull out 30 to 40% matching and you say, hey, that's as good as it can get. But I mean, I think going forward, what about dynamic hashing? What if I can sort of, like lookalike modeling, dynamically decide to let machine learning figure, well, in this part of the country, address is more important than email, and just have a little bit more control and transparency around how this identity is turned into online targeting mechanisms, which we know as cookies or universal identifiers. And I think we have a very long way to go there, and until we actually get a little bit further, we're still dealing with some very squishy numbers.
Well, magic word, transparency. Are we going to get to a point where, from a buy side, we actually have transparency on where our advertising is being run? Because we don't really have it with everything that we do, especially when it's exchange-based.
I'm not convinced that complete transparency is actually a necessary thing. I think that the issue is really around fraudulent activity or ensuring that your ad went in front of the right set of eyeballs in a brand safe environment. I don't know that complete transparency is is a realistic aspiration or something that publishers are really going to help deliver on. Yeah.
You mean
I'll actually-
tell the brand, don't worry, we're going to run you in the right places?
No. No, not at all. I mean, I think that's a very old-fashioned approach. But I think that using technology and data, we can actually help to build a brand-safe environment where we don't have to base our idea of brand safety around the website that you're appearing on. I think that's a very old-fashioned approach to
I also think we're not very far away. You know, I'll be maybe aggressive and say we're within 5 years of no major publisher trying to obfuscate that they delivered an ad. You know, I think it should be fairly easy for us to do. There's very little reason left for that to be a hidden piece of information, and a lot of it had to do with concerns about channel conflict and cannibalization of demand against your supply. That a lot of these things are evaporating because everything's moving to programmatic sales. You know, there's just very little reason to keep those data points. In fact, the opposite is true, right? There's every reason to actually be transparent about the fact if I'm a high quality publisher that in fact you're buying this impression on my website because it's worth more money. So you know, I think that problem kind of can take care of itself if you know, if it's allowed to.
I actually think that our obsession with website is part of the problem. I
disagree with you.
I think that using websites as an indicator of kind of brand safety is not necessarily the most healthy thing.
So Tom, you're saying that you don't believe content has any value?
No, I'm not saying content has no value. I think that at the moment we don't measure the value of content. I think that's a huge, huge problem. I actually think that the way that we buy, when we're showing an ad, we're showing it to a person, not to a website, very, very simply. So this obsession with websites is quite bizarre. Why, you know, when we do trading deals, we're still buying websites. When are we going to move? We've already accepted that we buy audiences.
But it's just a data point, right? It's one of many. And the intersection of the site you're on, the modality that you're in, whatever we want to call that. I've heard it called 5 things this week so far. And all of the data we have about you as a user should be gone into in order to determine the value of that impression on a per buyer, per advertiser basis. But it's really important, I think, to include that publisher brand in the value calculation.
I just think for us to be really successful in programmatic, we're missing a really big piece of the puzzle, and it's got to involve linear. Because when I sit here over a couple of days and saw the data science hackathon presentations, and we're really, really lauding like the fact that IKEA has figured out a weather-based bidding strategy to maybe let other people exhaust their budgets and buy into, you know, the remaining inventory and get lower bid pricing. And our CTR went from, you know, 0.03 to 0.1. Holy cow, it's a 767% increase in effectiveness. But at the same time, if you think about how people really, really buy stuff, right, it's like, hey, I just bought a Volkswagen, man, this thing's great. I'm telling my neighbor it's got leather seats, you know, it gets 40 miles to the gallon, it's fantastic. So the way influence is created is among people talking to each other, and the primary way that influence is created is through storytelling, which happens best on TV and linear. And so what we're seeing people like Comscore do and Nielsen try to do and the big measurement companies try to do, instead of using soft panel-based instrumentation and guesses about, you know, what influences people and creates brand sentiment, they'd like to bring a lot of what we're doing now, which is collecting really granular bits of audience data, and try to model out in a very real way for media mix modeling and attribution, you know, what is the impact of 75% of the budget that's out there being spent, or I guess now 50, and reconcile that with what's happening digitally. So, you know, the true model becomes apparent. I.e., I saw a television ad 15 times that really resonated with me, and then by the time I got on the internet late at night, wanted to buy it anyway, I clicked somewhere and just got to the site and made a purchase. So until we reconcile and bring truly granular measurement data to linear, I think we're screwed because we really don't know what the hell we're talking about.
Well, let's talk about premium for a minute. Let's go away from sites and talk about, well, it's drilling down on the sites, really. We know in print that there's a difference in recall and brand effect from the fourth cover versus an inside page that's opposite another ad. We know in television that there is a difference in recall in prime time versus fringe time. Why wouldn't we want to know if our ad was going to run on the home page or the opening page of a major section versus somewhere on the site against that same audience? There might be, especially on a branding campaign, I can see what you're saying, maybe on a direct response campaign, but on a branding campaign, might there not be some additional impact if we recognize that some positions, if you were, are better than others?
I mean, it's a startup idea to build a system that actually measures properly the impact of context, because it's something that at the moment we just use, we do random pieces of research post-campaign, but the tracking that we have currently doesn't measure that. So we talk about context having an impact, but we have no way of measuring it properly on an ongoing basis, and we have no way of altering the course of our campaign based on what's going on.
There's content there's content metrics that are a dozen years old that have been done. It's been done all the way through the web, I believe.
Yeah, I think that this issue, from the point of view certainly of a system that's making decisions in real time about what to buy, is much more about instrumentation and having the right data available, as well as having the right inputs to make those decisions from. There's a lot of discussion around, bottom of the funnel purchasing versus top of the funnel purchasing of media. Whereas we're at the point of very sophisticated algorithms that actually can be shepherding people through the funnel and making good decisions based on all of these criteria. Problem is that often the data that is selected by the users of these systems that are super sophisticated are really just either not using any data whatsoever and just looking for performance, which the vast majority, I think, I forget where I read that, but just recently I read that the vast majority of campaigns being run in programmatic are purely being optimized on conversion basis with absolutely no targeting whatsoever. And the flip side to that is, if you put all of this targeting in, do the algorithms actually make use of it? So I think we are looking at a sort of a step point in this industry where we talk a lot about all the data we have. We talk about the fact a lot about whether it's first or third party, but in reality, a lot of the systems aren't being harnessed the way they could by having that data all leveraged properly.
Is that a function of a difference between a brand goal and a direct response goal to some degree?
From my point of view, they're just goals, and the system should be optimizing every impression against a host of goals.
Okay. We've got some time left, but is there something that anybody out here is dying to ask this group of experts about programmatic? Got a couple down here in the front row. I guess they sat down here for a reason. Let's go with Joshua first. I said let's go with Joshua first. He had his hand up too. Okay. He was raising his hand for you, Miko. Okay.
Miko.
All right, Miko.
Yeah, we are
That
very
seems like
polite.
a stealth vote.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I wanted to-
Short questions, please.
Yes, very short. I wanted to hear more, because you all mentioned about at least in the both ends, about universal ID. That's, I think,
Say that
really
again, please, sorry.
the universal ID, some kind of a system where the data can actually move, because right now we all know very well that within this ecosystem, data is not moving the way it could.
You're the one that mentioned it, man.
Yeah, I mean, I guess our point of view is that without a universal ID, it's very hard to reconcile identity at all. So in the cookie-based identity space, I probably have 5 or 6 different cookie-based IDs. You see IDFA, I have maybe 3 or 4 of them, device IDs from a Roku or set-top box or what have you. Unless you create the parent-child ID relationship and reconcile those individual child IDs up to a universal ID and store and continually refresh that ID dynamically, then you can't keep the truth of that identity, nor can you use it for targeting, and the ability to actually continually take these child IDs and reconcile them up to the universal ID and refresh that constantly in real time as you get more data inputs is really the function of what we're starting to think of as a second generation DMP, not cookie-based, but something that stores at a base level, raw, log level user data continuously and makes that data available to enrich that ID. So I think where we're going in the data marketplace business in general is to really, at the user level, at the raw data level, store as much data as possible, have an open taxonomy, and be able to use all that data very dynamically to continue that enrichment and continue maintaining the truth of an individual's identity.
Okay, program board, make a note. Universal ID might be a very, very good topic for next time around, and whether we do that through first-party data or other means. There was somebody halfway down the aisle here. I can't see very well with the lights.
Yeah, hi. I just have a question about mobile. It's like the elephant in the room, effectively. Nobody seems to figure out how to buy across mobile. You have App Universe, you have mobile web, and you have the two big 800-pound gorillas, Facebook and Google, who control that whole market. I'm just wondering how, this is all very well, great to talk about going to the next level using big data, but if we can't use the data as independently across all channels, including mobile, it's kind of like, a useless conversation, effectively. So how do we join the dots there? That's my question.
We've got heavy echo up here, and so I don't know that anybody up here got that question. Can you parse it simply and just speak slowly?
Okay. My question is, how do you make this data work across the mobile? Did you hear that? Did you?
Across mobile.
Yeah. So, there's huge black spot there for the industry. So, how do you see that working out for you guys?
Well, there are these little devices that people carry, and ads
I know
get
that.
shown on them. That's what you're talking about?
Yeah. Mobile devices specifically, yes.
I don't know that this is actually going to be a problem for much longer. I think that everybody's working on this problem of connecting IDs across devices and web behavior. So I don't know that it actually is that much of a black box problem to begin with, but I know that it's not a problem that will last very long.
We certainly had a panel this morning that talked about it, and there will be more before this conference is over. I think you're right. There are a lot of companies, and a lot of them are here, who are working on solutions, and they're well funded.
That. I mean, like if you're a platform and you create a universal ID and you see a user logging into a desktop, you see them logging into mobile, you see them logging into tablet, and then that same user that you have a universal ID on is also a segment member of 3 other different publishers, you can reconcile all those individual IDs up again from a child to a parent relationship and say this is the user on mobile. So a lot of that's being done probabilistically now, but increasingly when you see at scale users logging in across devices, the truth of identity is established.
Yeah, and even probabilistic is a very rational and reasonable approach, but always good to get better if you can.
Was there one more back there? Okay, because I've got a bunch of them. Somebody's waving their hands there. Get the mic. Oh, it's Joshua. Okay.
I guess
For
sitting
real
in the
this
front row
time.
doesn't help
Okay.
get called upon. So we've heard a lot of conversation about the IDs, and personally, I think digital holds itself up to impossible standards, and we keep setting the goal further and further away from reality. Eventually, sure, we're going to have that. I do believe we can do plenty of measurement and tracking today. We've heard a lot of conversation about the information associated with all those IDs, the first party, the second party, the third party audience data, and then contextual data and other types of information being associated with all these IDs. But I wanted to go back to something you began with, which is programmatic was supposed to simplify and automate, and yet it seems to have added a whole bunch of complexity. My question is around the economics. So traditionally, we did these upfront buys, where we would do some planning, and then we'd negotiate a contract and hand the operations to the publisher. Then the ad networks came in, and they absorbed a lot of that ad operations, trying to match up the audiences to the inventory with their own technology, sometimes their own data, but they were doing the work. Now with the programmatic and the buyers or the agencies having the tools to do what the publisher did or the ad networks did, they don't seem to be getting the value from the brand to do that extra work of the intra-campaign ad operations. So I'm wondering, do we need to reevaluate the economics to compensate for the intra-campaign work and complexity that I believe programmatic actually empowers buyers to change intra-campaign and adjust to the signals that are coming back in real time?
We are going out for drinks later. Yeah, this has been a real passion point for myself, for me. I think that having worked on both the buy side as a tech vendor for many years and at Microsoft on the publisher side and learning actually how much work was being done by the publishers on all of these RFP buys, that was very masked from me when I was on the buy side. I had no idea actually how much work was being done. I think that that this is a real problem, but it's a problem that will get resolved through more and more automation. But that's not the way that I hear this problem described from within agencies that I talk to. Usually there's this concern about how we're going to have to lay off people because we're automating things so much down the road. Like this promise of automation is, well, is this a cost savings issue for us? And that's obviously not going to be true. I mean, the number of people that have to be applied for programmatic buying is, if not the same, more, and the people, the skill sets applied are even more expensive. So I don't think we'll see that problem resolved anytime soon. But yeah, like I've had this conversation with many agencies who are lamenting the fact that they have to go back and make the case to their clients that they need higher margins or more revenue coming in. It's a tough problem. Dave may be the right one on the panel to answer this one.
We have 30 seconds left. Each of you, 10 seconds on what do you want to see developed relative to programmatic that we haven't solved yet?
I think, to Eric's point, it's about workflow automation. So, 487 hours for a single media plan, 10 to 12% of budget for marketers looking just to get a plan off the ground. Where is the tool? And I'll add to that.
That's your 10 seconds.
Automation.
Headlines, guys.
Okay, automation, better automation, simplicity, absolute simplicity in the way we talk about programmatic. That is the biggest development that we could drive.
Eric, you have the hammer.
Yes, and also automating creative way beyond what dynamic creative is doing today.
Yeah, we didn't even get into creative, and program board, take that into account. We'd love to do a panel next time on programmatic and creative, including frequency capping, dynamic creative, sequential messaging, and a lot of other things that we need to take into account in the creative arena, and that would be a good panel in above itself. Thank you very much.